In the first two parts, I've discussed at length the issues of tribalism and how it specifically relates to the problems that we have here. Because so far in the story, the primary threat to all the human beings has unfortunately been other human beings turning upon each other. They are in a distant and unknown part of space, on a distant and unknown planet, with unknown threats, and their first enemy is each other. This has led to countless avoidable deaths on both sides and a hardening of factions. This can be seen when Holden agrees that Naomi should sabotage the weaponized shuttle that the RCE forces now have. The situation... well, perhaps I should clarify things. There is no doubt that Murtry, chief of RCE security and its de facto head with the governor now gone, suffers from some kind of mental problem, though one of the mistakes of the book is that the background of this condition goes unexplained. Murtry is not a sociopath like the scientists of Protogen, nor is his mind broken like that of Ashford, but his mind's direction, as we'll discover, is so askew that it defies explanation. He has reasons for his actions, but his reasons are often highly questionable from any form of logic. Attempt is made in the story to imply some degree of depth to the character, but ultimately, his antagonist's position seems to be there because the authors need a villain and don't have a reason for his villainy. There are times when it is worthwhile to let readers infer motivations and such for character behavior, but the lack of context in this case leads to a character that seems to give the steering wheel a hard turn simply because sooner or later he and Holden have to be trying to kill each other, and it would be helpful for the audience to think that Holden is in the right. This is vital because Murtry is the stumbling block here, although it should be noted that Holden has not helped matters. His insistence that his position as the UN OPA mediator makes him effectively king of this planet and can order people off of it at gunpoint is not only highly questionable, but has given both of the other two sides less reason to want to cooperate with him. Thus, what should logically be happening right now is that the weaponized shuttle should be restored to aid in whatever final resolution is required, instead of being wasted as a potential bomb. Holden pointing out that restoring it is as much of a reasonable act as giving RCE control of the colonist explosives to ensure that they're not weaponized either, well, that would have helped. But the three sides have done so little to earn trust from each other that instead of working together, they're working at cross purposes. Naomi's attempts to sabotage the shuttle instead gets her captured by RCE and locked away, and repeated attempts are made throughout this section of the book to have her released, all of which fail because, in the end, of the problem that led to her capture. You can hardly rant and rave about their lack of trust in releasing Naomi when it was their own lack of trust that led to her capture in the first place. And one can say, but their lack of trust in Murtry was justified. To which I say, yes, just as RCE's lack of trust of the Rocinante crew is justified. I'm not trying to make the point that our heroes are in the wrong. I'm trying to make the point that, in truth, objectively speaking, everybody is in the wrong. Arguing about who is more wrong is only perpetuating the very problem that led to this, doubling down on bad decisions and leaving them in the predicament that they are now in when the true enemy finally shows itself. The planet. The first hint at it is when one of the machines awakens, for lack of a better term. Elvie compares it to hibernation. Some things just wake up wrong in that case. They dispatch the machine easily enough. Then one of the artificial moons of the world begins to melt, a sign that something else has gone wrong. But the big concern comes next, as those in orbit observe on the opposite side of the planet some kind of an explosion. And it's enormous. It's as if an asteroid had smashed into the planet, creating a massive tidal wave spreading out in all directions and heading around the planet. And this poses a problem because, as the RCE geologists had griped about several times, this is a world without geologic activity. Tectonic plates aren't shifting things around, meaning there's no earthquakes, but it also means there's no mountains. With the tsunami this large and no mountains or hills to serve as a barrier, then the water is going to roll right across the endless plains and smash the fragile colony like the angry hand of God. The humans finally put aside their differences and all withdraw to the alien structures to wait out the disaster, though at least one colonial family is lost when they fail to return in time. And despite this, despite what happens, the tribalism remains. Murtry has his own people confirm the incident that caused this, infuriating Holden in spite of the fact that, as established, nobody has any reason to trust each other. In fact, this kind of attitude drives Elvie, the only viewpoint character to rise above tribalism, remember, to break down into tears because Holden makes a remark about the RCE security forces aiding the refugee colonists. He says it in such a way as if it's only the shared tragedy that caused them to come to their aid, and she's offended at the idea that they would not help these people any other way, that they would be so awful as to withhold help from people desperately needing it. They're just mustache-twirling villains to him. Elvie is getting the same treatment from the colonists as well, despite her help for all of them. She's getting it from the wife of one of the terrorists whose spouse was killed in the raid, blaming all of RCE for the fact that her murdering wife was finally killed. Or just the colonists who, even while RCE shares supplies with them after the settlement has been wiped away, still has nothing but contempt for them in his brazen conversation with Holden. And RCE has its share of those who haven't learned the lesson, like the chief engineer of the Israel. His engineers are part of Havelock's militia to provide security in the wake of those murders. The guy questions whether or not the colonists set off that explosion deliberately to try to distract them, wipe out their own settlement, just in the hopes of some long-game attempt to get Naomi out of the cell. The planet itself is the enemy, but even as disaster is quite literally raining around them, they can't stop looking and seeing them, instead of recognizing that there is no you, and there is no him, and there is no her, and there is no me, just us. And this planet is bound and determined to see us killed. No, we're all intent on making sure that when we're all dead, at least we can die knowing we were in the right. After the wave come subterranean slugs to the surface, and they quickly learn that the slime the creatures are covered with contains a deadly neurotoxin, and all that rain in the wake of the tsunami drops a creature that had been observed previously infecting the eyes of one of the children. This microscopic organism will now get into the eyes of everyone here and eventually lead to them being completely blind. Not because it specifically induces blindness, but because it sees the inside of an eye as a rich nutrient-filled sack of salt water. So ironically, it's colonizing them. These things, much like the waves that wash the place away, don't see the human divisions any more than the humans might see divisions among these death slugs or blindness plague bearers. The cause of the explosion, likely a malfunction in some kind of underground fusion reactor. Miller says that the lithium is the reason for this planet being on the network after all, and since lithium is useful in fusion reactors, that suggests that it was fusion. It also implies that the defense network's response is actually triggered by its own malfunctioning equipment, because the remaining shuttle on the Israel attempting to bring down relief supplies is shot down and something similar to the slow zone put in place around the planet, except instead of preventing inertia, is preventing fusion from taking place. They're all trapped now, trapped on the planet, trapped in decaying orbits in space, all facing a death from gravity, poison, or starvation. During this period, Alex has spoken with Baja, who has been feeling sorry for himself over the predicament that he is in, stuck in orbit rather than down on the planet. To which Alex only comments that Baja screwed things up real good. Alex then explains the bit of his past that he had wanted to keep to himself, how he had a wife who waited for him to serve out his career flying for the Mars Navy, being gone a lot of the time while going on tour and such, and she remaining patiently at home. After retirement, Alex found himself going stir-crazy, and eventually he got into a fight with his wife, took a job at Pure and Clean hauling ice, and that was that. As Alex explains, you can hurt someone just by being what you are, something you can't help but being, but you do still have to own it. You can't pretend that hurting your loved ones isn't your fault just because you had a good reason, just because it was in your nature to do something. You do what you do, and you own it. You don't hide from it. Don't collapse into self-pity when the consequences of it arrive. Part of ending the cycle, Baja learns, is to get his children to understand that him being trapped up here is not RCE's fault, and it's not Holden's fault. It's his fault that he was taken away. As Baja discovers, as he later is finally able to admit the horrible truth, the reason for his actions was because he had failed his son Katoa, wanted to hurt others because he had been hurt, because he hadn't wanted to admit that he had left his son to die, lashing out at the universe that wronged him to repay it for the pain and guilt that he felt. He wanted to hurt others because he'd been hurt, and he wound up hurting his own family in the process. And now, maybe even causing the rest to die just like Katoa, with him unable to save any of them. Save them from the real enemy.